Welcome to the clinical cookout. You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. Four educated queens taking the lead, hold their hands and they'll help you succeed. Lay your head back, relax, just like that. Now listen to, learn, and your problems will burn away. Cookout, you know, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the cookout.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Clinical Cookout. It's time for our hot sauce.
Our hot sauce is when we talk about trending topics and we relate them to mental health. Let's get it.
All right, y'all. So today for our hot sauce, to kind of go in line with our theme of this week, which is racial trauma, I wanted to touch on something that I saw on social media a couple weeks ago that Jamie Foxx said. So in case y'all didn't see it, Jamie Foxx made a post, and that post got taken all types of left by people who really just don't understand African American or Black vernacular, or understand some of our phrases or terms or things that are well known to us but might not be well known to others. So I'm gonna tell y'all what he said and how it was taken. So he made a post and it said, "They killed this dude named Jesus. What do you think they'll do to you? Fake friends, fake love." Now, all Black people seemingly knew what that meant. If you ever been to church, you have heard that. Like, they killed Jesus, what would they do for you? Well, a few people decided that this was an anti-Semitic comment. And Black people were like, where? Like, do y'all not understand the context of this comment? And so I wanted to talk today in the hot sauce about how do we feel when people misunderstand our speak. Like, we have a certain language that we as Black people understand, and when other people try to step in and get in our business, they might mess it up or take it the wrong way. So what do y'all think?
Honestly, it burns my ass. I'll just say it burns my ass.
Flames.
And the reason why I say it like that is because I think that there's this hyper awareness now to be politically correct, and there's this hyper awareness around, oh, now everything is racist, or everything is now everything's now a slur or a term that's being taken out of context. Everything. So when things are being discussed within our community and people jump over into our community and never even took the time out to get to know us in the first place, and then take something like that had absolutely nothing to do with anything to do with Jewish people at all, and take that out of context, it really burns me, because I'm tired of we already have to explain ourselves. Now we have to explain our intercommunication with each other, all because someone decided to jump into something that they had no clue about. Burns my ass.
The thing about that comment is that, like, I mean, every Black household done said it, because it's like kind of the sticks and stones of our of our culture, where they talked about Jesus. What make you think they don't talk about you? Like, that's really what gets us through. That's what curbs a lot of anxiety, because a lot of times you walking into the room and you're scared of people and what they're going to say about you. You scared of everything, like the negative feedback. And the first thing my grandmother said, "Girl, they talked about Jesus. They're going to talk about you. It's fine." So it's really helpful. But when, first of all, I don't like African American vernacular English. I don't know whatever happened to Ebonics, but just the way that we communicate with each other, nobody is supposed to understand that. That's the thing. It's not supposed to be for everybody. That's why everybody can't get it.
I am all about gatekeeping it. Like, some people have a problem with gatekeeping, but in certain things we need to, so we can avoid problems like this. Because the two issues with this whole thing was it wasn't even a Jewish person who was offended. Jennifer Aniston made it a problem, the actress. She made it an issue. And I'm like, ma'am, like, you ain't even, why are you in this business? And then this idea, it bothered me because I'm like, why is it such a horrible thing when other groups get offended, or something is said that could offend other groups, but people can say whatever they want about us and nobody ever has to explain themselves. It's been comedians and people all over that say things about Black people all the time, and I don't see the uproar behind that. And I'm like, so it's okay when it's us, when we're the target, but it's never okay when somebody else is the target. And that's my issue. And I hate that we have to explain ourselves. Like, I'm not explaining myself for something that you shouldn't have been a part of in the first place.
I'm sorry, Ashley, but there was no target. That's the problem. There was no target. There was Black people talking to Black people saying, if people talk about you, be like, people are going to talk about the most well-known person in the world. What makes you any different? Like, that is all that was. It wasn't, had nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with that.
Well, let me give you a little bit of context. The reason why they took it there is because he said they killed Jesus. And I guess the anti-Semitic part was because for generations and generations, it's been a common slur that Jewish people killed Jesus. And like and they don't like that. They don't like being that. So my thing is, though, with Jamie Foxx's specific tweet wording, he said they. If you ain't the they, why you hollering? Hit dogs holler. Why would I? Who's they? They could be anybody.
Which is why it's an issue that they center themselves in a conversation that had nothing to do with them. We wasn't even talking.
So looking for reasons to be like, some people look for reasons to be like, oh no, I'm not associated with that, because in a lot of entertainment is run by the Jewish culture. So when you don't want to be, I wouldn't want to be associated with something that could shut me down too. That's really more so what it is in that respect. But as far as our actual community and the way we speak to each other, it's not for everybody to understand. The great Denzel Washington said something about a hot comb, and that the culture is when you hear about when it hits the back of your neck, you know how that feels. Like, it's different, is what I'm saying. Okay, I can't quote it, but what he's saying is that culture and just being African American are two different things. We are a subculture within the American culture, and so everybody's not supposed to understand us. They don't get it. What's the name? Jaheim said we fabulous. That's why we are the way we are, and I think that everybody wants a piece of that pie, but they don't understand what they're eating. I be deep.
I love that. Everybody wants a piece of pie, but they don't know what they eat. They don't know the flavor. They don't know they don't know how it's made. None of that. But I do get irritated with that, because I feel like even when I'm like out in public with my family or with my kids, like I say stuff to my kids like, I'm gonna chop you in your throat if you don't sit down, right? And if somebody that is not us walked up and seen that, they would think I'm actually gonna chop my kid in the throat. That's child abuse, which is not the case. It's just like, you need to sit down or we're gonna leave or whatever. But stuff like that, it makes me feel like I have to I can't be myself when I'm out in public.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to censor myself in that way when I'm out in public. I should be able to be who I am without the fear that somebody who's non-Black is going to hear something I say and call somebody on me because they don't understand what I'm saying. So it is really irritating that we can't just be in this world. And the reason that we can't be is because the perspectives or the views that other people have on our community, and they always want to be all up in our business. Like, you don't want to have nothing to do with us, but you want to be all up in our business and what we're doing, how we're talking, how we're living in this world. And a lot of that comes from history and just people not being able to form their own views. They're getting this from what they've heard from their parents and grandparents and all of that. So I do know that our episode, we're about to hit on a lot of that stuff, especially in terms of racial trauma, but also how that has affected us as beings now. In America and in the world.
You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary.
So for this episode, we wanted to touch on racial trauma, because as you've heard in our hot sauce and in our trivia, we highlighted some things that are going on in our community and how we are affected by racial trauma. Um, and we think that it's important for us to understand that these things don't just roll off our back. Those type of interactions that we have with our outside world, with people who don't understand us, those things start to pile on us time and time and time and time again. And we want to start having this conversation more openly and more honestly with our community and even with others who may not be a part of our community about how these things affect us. So, ladies, aunties, what are some things that we want to kind of talk about and go into when it comes to racial trauma or even our own personal experiences?
The first thing Amber was saying is that when she was in public, and I was gonna say this during the hot sauce, but like when she in public, she talks to her kids a certain way. Like, I'm gonna chop you in your throat. I just told her like yesterday, do it again and I'm gonna knock your dreads off. And like if certain people hear that, like that's gonna sound terrible. But at the same time, am I really gonna do it? No, it doesn't mean I beat my kids. No, it doesn't mean any of that. But I've seen like white people step in, like when my cousin has been threatening her child or saying what she was going to do, or even when she actually even spanked her child, and people feel like they have the right to say things about the way children are reared. But then the way the first, like the thing that we have is, well, I have to discipline my kids. Don't mean it's gonna be a spanking. You don't get to say what I get to say to them. You don't get to say if I whoop them. You don't get to say how I discipline my kids, because if my kids are growing up and they acting out and they in the streets, guess who gonna discipline them? The police. And guess what they giving out a lot of times? Whoopings. So when people are actually doing their thing or actually raising their kids, and you are most of the time in business that is not yours, and it's just because it's not your way, doesn't mean that it's wrong. You know what I mean? Like some people get partial views of the story and they just go with whatever they want to go with. So that's a part of our racial trauma, is because no matter what, somebody is always telling us what to do and how to do it, even with our own offspring.
I would have to say microaggressions is something that can accumulate up to like a racial like or traumatic experience. And I will say that because my uncle just told me today, he was like, Keisha, every time you get on a clinical cookout, he was like, your hair is always different. He's like, I never know what your hair is going to look like. And I'm like, well, hell, neither do I. But I have come, I have come into this place where about my hair, where I had a supervisor before. I'm not going to name where I worked at, but I had a supervisor before who said something about my hair and equated my hair to professionalism when it was straight. And while that may not feel like a big deal to somebody else, like my hair is my identity. And to tell me that I look professional only when it's straight, like sis wanted to smoke. And she was gonna get to smoke too. But luckily I was graduating with my master's at the time. And I couldn't say what I wanted to say, but it's those little instances where somebody is judging me just based off my hairstyle. And professionally, to be totally honest, if she had the reins to hire me or not, that goes through my mind. Like, if I'm showing up at an interview, is somebody not going to hire me because my hair's more kinky or
Yeah.
it's curly? Or, I have to literally think through how I'm going to look. And so now I'm just like, you know what? I'm showing up to work the way I want to show up because I don't have time to have anxiety about if somebody's going to hire me based off what my hair look like versus off my skills and professionalism. So that's been a personal experience of mine. And I still to this day, make sure that I show up authentically myself because I'll be damned if I go through any racial trauma with these
I'm,
folk.
I'm burning, Keish. I'm burning because I have to say something about that. So when I went into my interview, uh, for my doctorate program, not for the doctorate program interview, but for my practicum. You know what I do in my interviews now, and I've done it even in the last interview I just had when I got this new job. I said I wear my hair natural. Is that going to be a problem? And I
Oh,
said just like that. And the first time it was no, your hair is natural, it's fine. Now if you would have had dreadlocks, it might be a problem. That's what was said, because dreadlocks are equated with being unclean, because and I had to educate, but it was like it's an accumulation of dead hair. And instead of actually letting it shed, you just keep on accumulating your hair. And I was like, actually, that's not what it is. And I had to like tell them what dreadlocks is and how they're spiritual to some people and how no, they can be kept clean and they can be kept professional. And that's a stereotype. And then in my second interview, I was like, my natural hair, I wear my natural hair. Sometimes I wear African garb. I'm always professional. Is that going to be a problem? And they were like, nope, no problem at all. So really, sometimes you really have to kind of lead with that stuff because people really do have those biases. And people like to say, oh, we don't. No, you do.
You
And so
do.
I go in my interview and I say that because when I wear my hair in an afro, I won't hear nothing on that day. Period.
And see what both of y'all just described. Even talking about this, I want people to understand how deep racial trauma is. Even us having this conversation that is a much needed conversation is a triggering conversation. To think about these instances and these situations is literally making us angry or emotional, and people are like, well, y'all shouldn't be getting angry and emotional. It's a reason for that, because we have to deal with this on a daily basis. My issue is you shouldn't have had to even ask, could you wear your natural hair if it would be a problem? Why did you have to ask that? The fact
Right.
that you had to is pissing me off. And then with the other part of it, with Keish describing, thinking about her hair, my other issue is it's a problem when we do it. But then once they do it, once they pick up our culture because they want our rhythm and not our blues, then it's trendy. Like, you got people arguing on the internet right now about white girls wearing culturally specific hairstyles that we wear, like micro braids and things that are not for their hair texture. And I'm like, but it's okay when they wear it, but we out here and got to have a crown act so we can be able to wear it without being discriminated against. This makes no sense. And I don't think people realize how that affects us. It's not a matter of people shouldn't be able to wear their hair the way they want to. It's a problem because when it was us, it was a problem. And now it's them and it's okay. And y'all arguing for them to be able to wear it. Like, that's painful for us.
Yeah.
Especially when there's a whole history of there was a whole history where women were told, black women specifically, had to wear like things like Suge got on, like the wrap, because white men didn't want their hair out.
Yep. Yep.
That was like literally a thing. So yeah, the hair issue gets on my nerves,
Yep.
and it's really unfortunate. Um, it's just not. I I just feel like this conversation can go left. There's many things that we could probably talk about when it comes to racial trauma. So yeah.
Um, so yes, I agree with you, Ashley. It pisses me off that we even have to say things like that. Like, you even have to ask, is it okay for me to wear my natural hair to work? We can't simply exist. Like, we have to exist, but with reason. We have to make sure that we're sharing these things with people so they're not judging us, and it's just ridiculous. And then the anxiety that comes with that, it's not just about our hair either, the color of our skin. Just walking into a room, into a professional room. Like, y'all know how I am about not doing conferences and like panels and stuff in front of strangers. That is a big part of it, because I feel like I don't speak in the same way that non-white folks speak. And so I always worry, like, do I sound uneducated? Because I am black, so they already think I'm uneducated. So when I'm up there talking to people, that's the thing that's going in the back of my mind. Am I saying big enough words? Do I sound smart? I need to sound smart, or they're going to think I'm uneducated. I'm not doing that just because I think that about myself. It's because that's what the world has told me about myself and about my people. And so whenever I go into situations like that, that's all that I can think about. And I know a lot of us have probably got to the point where we have learned how to reframe and think about it differently, or just look at the skills and like our strengths and think about that when we're presenting or in those settings. But it drives me crazy. So my anxiety spikes to the point where I can't even think. So I just avoid those settings. And me avoiding that fucking pisses me off. That, like, I can't even be happy sharing education and doing the job that I love to do, because I'm so scared that I'm going to look like an uneducated black woman, or that somebody's going to say something and I'm going to defend myself and I'm going to look angry, or my hair doesn't look professional enough. And white women or non-black women do not have to think about that very much. Let me say white women in particular. because other minorities probably do. But
You know what,
This
Amber? That same thing happens to me all the time. So I have to get told at work, you don't have to try and sound smart. You have the credentials. We know that. You're going to sign them at the end of the paper. Just talk. I get told that by a white man every time. I write my reports like, don't overdo it. Because I've started doing, like, I do that sometimes when I talk, because at one point in time I was told, you use too much slang, or, you don't, you're not speaking correctly. And so then I'm like, okay, let me zhuzh it up a little bit. But then they're like, okay, now bring it down. So find like a regular space, and then that you can exist in. So now when I do conferences and stuff, I'll just bring me. I do. I just bring me, and I mean, they know who they're getting when they ask for somebody with a ID or a LPC. They know exactly who they're getting. So I kind of had to, and I don't always CBT myself like that. I don't always reframe that. I still go in there and I still start off like that. Then I'm like, I can't even talk like this. It's not coming out right. Nothing is being said that I want to be said. And so then I just have to let go and take that mask off and be myself.
And you know what y'all both just described? Oh my God. This is one of the biggest, or one of the bigger issues of racial trauma. What y'all both just described is imposter syndrome. We get made to feel like we don't belong in a space, or we're not smart enough, we're not capable, even though all the facts prove otherwise. We have this feeling of, am I supposed to be here? They're going to think I'm not supposed to be here. They're going to view me this way. And that can lead to so many issues. I just did some research on imposter syndrome because I have a lot of clients actually dealing with it. And come to find out, Black women suffer from it the most. We suffer from imposter syndrome the most, statistically. Women in underrepresented groups are 3 times as likely to experience imposter syndrome, because all of those microaggressions and traumas and things we have to think about and things we have to explain that nobody else has to do then gets implanted in our unconscious mind to just be there like, okay, you got to do more. You got to work overtime. You got to be twice as good to get half as much. Like, those sayings get embedded in our psyche. And even if we try to reframe it and think against it, we still constantly fall back into it every time we have to show up, until we drop the mask and say, look, I'm just going to be me. I can't do this. It's exhausting. Because the more you got to go out and wear that mask to avoid things, that's traumatic. That's traumatic on your psyche.
And
I also,
Oh,
go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead. My bad. This one's good.
This is good. I also think that there could be another side of imposter syndrome where we take that where we have trouble taking that mask down, and I'm only going to speak from experience, where our white like supervisors and directors throw us in there too early because they don't have to think through those things. They're like, we'll just learn on the fly, or my job isn't at risk. Those stereotypes aren't going to come for me. So yeah, sure, you'll be fine. And not thinking of those things that happen for us. What I mean by that is like, yes, I just accepted my new position, but for me, I'm like, ooh, am I even ready to do this? Like, are people across the state going to see me? And like, how am I going to make it fit to their culture? Like, I had all these things going on. Meanwhile, they're like, oh, Keith, yeah, you'll be great. Good, go do it. Oh, and they were like pushing me, like, hey, we think you'll be great for this job. And I'm like, yeah, but am I ready? Am I ready? And sometimes they forget about how many steps and the psychological safety we have to have in order to move forward sometimes, because they never have to think about that safety. They never have to think about those steps we got to go through. So I do agree with what you're saying, and I also experienced it on the other side where they're pushing too early, and I'm like, I gotta walk through steps, and they're just like, no steps, just do it, and we're just like, oh. So I
Yeah.
think that there is there's a lot to be said about imposter syndrome.
I do think that when they do that, a way to fix that is to talk through it. Because I've had that, and I've talked through that recently. Like, well, you want me to write this report? How do you want it to look? How you want it to be? What do you want it to say? And that's when I had to get told. Because also that imposter syndrome don't always come from white people. It comes from intercommunity too. Because I was always told, you better say certain things. That person has your life in their hands. That person has the pencil in their hands. You better act right. You better do what you're supposed to do. And I was told that by my grandmother. And my grandmother's just black as me. But now I'm having to undo all of that now that I am working, as a doctor of psychology. So the first thing I have to do is like be like, okay, you got this. You know what I mean? You actually went and got the education. And then talk to my supervisor who's like, okay, I guess I never thought about it that way, because I have a supervisor that admits it. Like, I didn't think about it that way. So let me help you through it. Don't overthink it. You don't have to try and sound smart. I know you're smart. I hired you. You know what I mean? So like you do also have allies that can help you through those things if you just say something, because a lot, like you said, they don't have to think about that. But if we don't tell them, then why would they?
I think that's true. I think you're right about telling them like, hey, I'm gonna need some support in this area. And I've just been blessed to have a supervisor who we can talk about those things, and she's like, no, I think this is great, and how can I support you? And that's another thing, being open to how you can support somebody. You can't support somebody the way you want to support them in the ways they need to be supported. And I think that sometimes people miss that as well. And I'm really hoping that more people, when they watch this episode, that they'll understand that there is an internal process that we have to walk through and step through, to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, and it's so much harder for us because we're often placed in positions where the person above us, and I'm not talking just work and supervisors, but just people that have more power, are the ones who kind of control our fate, right? They tend to, do or say things that kind of like, it's like the trajectory of our lives are based on what they think or how they think things should go. And we don't really have a lot of control in that. And so when we're talking about trauma and that loss of control, the anxiety, like all of those feelings that rush back when you are in that position, it kind of reminds you of like being a slave, right? Like I have to put my head down and do these horrible things or these things that I don't really want to do, or that like I know I'm better than this. I have to do it because there's no other option for me. And
Yeah.
like that's where the trauma comes in, because that's your response is like, damn, like it doesn't feel good at all.
I want to speak to that trauma you're talking about when you said it makes you feel like a slave. The fact that we now know research wise that trauma is passed down, that the trauma our ancestors had has been passed down, and now we're experiencing racial trauma on a different level but still very similar. That's really insane to me. And this idea that, you know, we it also comes from our own, like Auntie Suge was saying. Sometimes it comes from our own, which gets me to the point of how anti-Blackness can also be a part of the racial trauma that we feel. Because I know I'm not the only person, like Auntie Suge said her grandmother would say to her, I'm not the only person who has heard somebody in the family or another Black person say to me, don't get in here and embarrass me in front of these white people. What?
Huh.
What? Don't get in here and embarrass you in front of these white people. What does that mean? Like, do you realize how traumatic that could be to somebody's psyche to now have to question every single thing about themselves to say, how do I present myself as perfect in front of these white people? How do I do that? And that's why so many of us deal with perfectionism and overworking and so many things that contribute to depression and anxiety and burnout, because we constantly in a hyper aware state of, I have to present a certain way to even be seen.
I would have to say yes. And going into that perfectionism can cause a lot of chronic illnesses and stress within the body. Auntie Amber talked about, having that anxiety and things of that nature. And when we talk about, having to be perfect and having to walk through all these psychological steps, there's so much that our body takes on because we're keeping it inside, because we don't have nowhere else to put it sometimes. And so we trying to keep it together not only for our family, but also for ourselves. And then our body starts to break down. And I wanted to kind of talk to y'all about, a couple stats that I had saw about our bodies and when it comes to having chronic stress. So we know that Black people are 20% more likely to have asthma and 3 times more likely than white people to die from it. Like, that's crazy. We talked about the Black women, or like Black women have 52% more likely to die from cervical cancer and 40% more likely to die from breast cancer than white women. Even though the incident rate of breast cancer is comparable for the two groups, we're more still likely to die. Also, I know this is a hot topic right now when it comes to racial trauma, and everybody knows about it. Black women are 243% more likely than white women to die from pregnancy or childbirth related causes. And college educated Black women, which is all of us have worse birth outcomes: infant mortality, low birth rates, dying in childbirth, than white women who not have even finished high school. So while we talk about these things when it comes to racial trauma and our experiences, this is life or death for us. That is what other people don't realize. Like, this is life or death for us. And the way this country has had a history of treating Black people, specifically Black women, and stuff that comes from our own inner community has got to stop. We've got to stop.
So when you're talking about life and death too, this also goes back to what I was saying about having people who are in positions of power that make decisions for us. Because one of the things we haven't talked about, which is very obvious, are the police and how they treat Black women, how they treat Black men, how they treat people in our community in general. And them being in that position of power and us feeling like we can't do anything about it, even if one of our family members is killed. I mean, people are starting to speak up more now than they ever have. But in the past, we just felt like we can't do anything about it because these are people that are in this position of power. And once again, the dynamic is very similar to slavery. We can't do anything. We can't say anything. And if we do, what's going to happen to the rest of our family or the rest of our community if we start speaking up about things like this? So that also contributes to the trauma as well.
And yes, and can I just speak to what you just described? So everybody has heard about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of your military vets have PTSD, or if you've had a traumatic experience, you might get PTSD. But the equivalent to that when we're talking about racial trauma is called race-based traumatic stress, or RBTS. And that's now, it's not in the DSM yet, but they are hyper aware that it exists. And basically it refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. And nearly all Black people, if not all of us, have had an experience that we can say gave us this type of stress and this type of trauma. So my whole thing is, when we talk about anti-Blackness and microaggressions and unconscious bias and implicit bias and all that, explicit bias, all that stuff, it becomes very overwhelming. And then it becomes very frustrating when people say, but yeah, y'all choose to keep this victim mindset. You choose to get offended. Do you not expect me to get offended by something that is literally life and death? Like Auntie Keish said, this is not a matter of me just being offended behind something small. My life is on the line. My stress levels, my anxiety, the fact that I can get out here and end up with high blood pressure or have a stroke or a heart attack because all of this is impounded on me. Yeah, I have every damn right to be offended and get really angry behind things like this.
I think that sometimes they don't understand that perception because their idea of Blackness is skewed versus their idea of whiteness. And what they associate those two things with is the reason why they don't understand our that it could be a life or death situation with us, because Blackness to them isn't centered. They're like, I'm centered, so why would I need to worry about me dying? Because people, those same institutions, the police, the laws, the power is going to always be in my favor. So why would I be worried about if you were dying or not? I'm going to live. And if you just do what I do, then yeah, you're going to live too. And not really understanding that Blackness has a whole different definition. Blackness means something way totally different in this country than whiteness. And a lot of people who are not conscious of that will not understand that. And they'll always have the mentality of, why are you so offended? And instead of asking the questions of, I wonder why our institutions are so against your people and not mine. I'm wondering how I benefit more from these disparities than you. Those are the questions, but nobody wants to ask that because they're not ready for accountability. Yeah. They're not ready.
It's also the comply or die mentality too. Like, well, just do what you're told to do, and everything will be fine. Or just like you said, just do what I do. Like, I literally had this dude say, comply or die. And I'm just like, does that even sound, that sounds crazy. Comply or die. So do what I say or you can lose your life. But it's not the same for everybody else. Yeah. So
because we're othered. Like Auntie Key said, they are centered. We are othered. We've always been othered. We are seen as the other. And speaking to just the police, like Auntie Amber brought up the police, and we've been kind of talking about that. To consistently get told comply or die means that what you are saying is the police are now judge, jury, and executioner, when that is not their job. It's not their job to judge or be the executioner of the situation. So even if we speak to the recent incident in Ohio, Takia, oh God, I got to think of her last name. It's a black girl in Ohio, pregnant, 21, came out of a Kroger. They said she was stealing. The police fired one single shot into her windshield. She dies. Her unborn baby dies. The video cam footage is out. I consistently tell Black people all the time, don't keep watching those things, because one, it starts to desensitize us, and two, it is traumatic. It is vicarious trauma to consistently watch our people die at the hands of police or at the hands of a neighborhood watch guard who think that he got some sort of power in your neighborhood. That is trauma. When you're watching that consistently, now not only are you having fear for yourself, and then they wonder why we're afraid of the police, because we die in situations where nobody else would have died. Like nobody else would have died. It doesn't make sense. And that's not to say that other groups don't die, but what's the rate? It's a totally different rate. It's disproportionate, and we don't see them as much. Stuff doesn't get put out there for us to for people to see on a consistent basis of other groups. It's just us. So if we're constantly dealing with these levels of trauma and constantly dealing with the fact that we are dealing with life or death, I don't know how to make them understand that we need to be centered at this point. We can no longer be othered because our life is on the line and theirs is not.
I don't know that that we can make other people understand, but so this is why I like working with the next generation. This right here is why I love to work on the next generation, because the best thing that we could do is teach ours that are coming up. So we need more lawyers. We need more judges. Um, Kentanji Jackson is the one that just was inducted into Delta Sigma Theta. We need that, because if we're going to be talking about our community and we're going to be raising up our community, we need people who look like us to have a hand in all of those laws. That's the only way, because trying to reteach people who've already been taught is difficult. The first thing I say is, I already been raised. How many other people had that same thought process? But just going, like, working through the racial trauma, that's going to have to start at home too, because you know what? And I would never say, oh, comply or die, comply or die. But I do have to teach you how to be arrested. I do have to teach you the things to say. You're not going to be a perfect victim. But I'm really trying to work through that, because, we raising Black boys and Black girls. It's exhausting, and it's traumatic in itself to try and raise a Black child in this.
But also let's not forget too, like we consistently say, I think people consistently say Black people are not a monolith, as like just a catch-all to make sure we're not all the same. We don't all think the same. But the idea of we want to put Black people in power positions, yes, and because it still depends on the type of Black person in the power position. Clarence Thomas is also in the Supreme Court, and he ain't for us. All kinfolk ain't skinfolk, period. So, or I mean, all skinfolk ain't kinfolk, period. So when you think about it like that, if we spin it back to blackness, not every Black person is for us either. And I think that's something we have to grapple with within our own community. We have to grapple with the fact that no, we can't trust every Black person. We can't, because some of them want that proximity to whiteness a little bit too much, and they then cause racial trauma too, just on a different level. But with that, this is a difficult conversation. As we've been talking, I have been watching all of us. Like, usually I don't really watch our body language, but all of us have had tense body language at moments. And it's very interesting that I can see that clearly on this episode. So I think instead of doing our normal foil this time, I think it would be a good idea for each of us to kind of say what is happening for us right now. Like, in this moment, what is happening for us?
I think in this moment, what's happening for me is I just want liberation for my people. I want reparations for my people. And I realize that this is hard work. And the more I've been doing this, the more I've been in my community, the more I've been researching, the more I'm trying to bridge the gap. This country wasn't made for us at all. Like, The type of stuff that I see, that I hear, that I watch, it just wasn't. It's just not. And sometimes I do feel hopeless and helpless because I'm like, what's the solution here? We've been marching, we've been crying, we've been yelling out, we got video footage, we got everything we need. Everything, like everything is laid out for them. And there's still no movement like we should have. And so for me, I want the liberation and I want the reparations, but to be totally honest, some days I feel helpless. And that's just being honest.
Well, for me, if I'm being honest, as we're having this conversation, because I've had thoughts of leaving America, like moving out of the country with my kids, just because we would be more accepted as a black family in another country, some of the other countries, than we would be here. And so as we're talking about this, I mean, I just get these. I know I would never be able to do it because my family's here, but it's kind of like this, just like, oh, I wish I could go. Like, I really just want to go. The only solution that I see for myself is just to escape this country. I mean, I see things getting better at some points, and then I see where America just falls right back into its same pattern. So it's just like the behavior patterns. Like, things are going to get great when we start raising awareness and showing them that these things are happening. Okay, let's put in some laws. And then a couple years later, boom, we're back to the same thing. So for me, it's like, I just want to go. Like, I just want to take my family, my babies, and my husband and just go somewhere where we don't even have to think about stuff like this.
So I've lived in other countries, and unfortunately, you might not have to worry about being killed in some other countries, but it is still awkward in other countries to where it's still like being on BET, unfortunately. Um Now, I haven't lived in every other country, so I'm sure that there are some of them that's gonna be better. But the ones I've lived in, I'm still on BET, like I hate it. So, but obviously those were European countries, European centered. So then there's that. But I don't know. I get triggered. I'm never hopeless. I just don't have that outlook. Sometimes if when I get hopeless, I think of, okay, what has happened? I can't say, like, I kind of challenge myself sometimes when I feel like really, really down. Because I feel like Keisha sometimes too. But then I can't say like, oh no, we haven't made any progress. We have made progress. Black people have made tremendous progress. And then I think that just because I'm a part of organizations that make sure that we are centered in our own right, I think that's what gives me more hope. I love working for us. I love working FUBU because the only way it's going to get better is when you actually do it. And so I think I feel like since I actually do the work, I know that things are going to change. There was this thing the other day that happened in Shreveport, and some of these were white men, and one of them said, well, we need to basically kind of like reform the police. And the other one was like, if we're going to do that, we got to get some of the crooks out of there. That was 100% like, bam, he said it. We got to get some of the crooks out of there. So he's acknowledging things. Like it's not the way it was before, and we do have a lot of progress to make. But as long as I feel like I'm a part of making that progress, I think I can keep on striving. That's what I think. So I feel hopeless sometimes, but other times I feel hopeful. As long as I'm doing something, I feel like there's hope.
All right, guess I can go last. Uh, I I typically only fare between 1 to 3 feelings here. Either I'm very angry, I feel defeated, or I feel empowered. And I tend to only feel empowered when I am in a space where I feel safe, where I'm in a space where Black people and specifically Black women are centered. So in this space of the clinical cookout with 3 amazing Black women, I feel empowered in this conversation. But I can acknowledge that throughout the whole episode, my body literally reacted to certain things y'all said. Like there were times where I got tense and my chest tensed up and I didn't know what I was gonna say next, and I was getting angry. I could feel it. And so I fluctuate between those feelings when it comes to this discussion, but I know it's a discussion we have to have. But overall, I just get tired. Like I'm tired. I'm tired of having the conversation. I'm tired of having the need to have the conversation. I'm tired of saying, oh, we've made so much progress, but there's always a but. There's always a backtrack. There's always a but. There's so much more. There's so much further to go, and I am tired. Like, when is it over? Like, even the mention of Ketanji, what's her? She's on the Supreme Court. Ketanji Jackson. Even the mention of her, as thrilled as I am that we have a black woman on the Supreme Court, it happened in 2022. Like, there's no way you can convince me that another black woman wasn't more than capable to be on that Supreme Court before now. We shouldn't still be breaking glass ceilings. Like, what world are we living in? So I get viscerally upset. This whole episode I've been on edge, and for me it's a matter of how do you deal with that? Like, I no longer know how to always deal with that. Sometimes I can reframe, sometimes I can breathe, do mindfulness, all these things that we know, but at the end of the day, it's just a cycle. It feels like a negative loop cycle. And it goes back and forth. Like you said, sometimes you feel hopeful, sometimes you feel hopeless, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're ambivalent. It's just a negative loop cycle. And I'm wondering, when will black people be able to get off that hamster wheel?
So we feel hopeful, hopeless. We're on a hamster wheel. We are actually actively right now talking, having these conversations, trying to do what we need to do. So we just want to know what y'all about to do.